What is an experiment? What does it mean to conduct an experiment? And what is actually involved in preparing, setting up, conceptualizing this type of research approach? Hopefully, after watching this video, you'll know the answer. I will be using a few ice cream examples in this video. Again, I'm not endorsing any brand, nor am I promoting ice cream consumption. I'm just using it for educational purposes. If you want to contextualize experiment into the research family that it belongs to, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, then it's definitely quantitative research methods. This is why I have letter N highlighted both in the word for quantitative research and also experiment so that you can easily make an association in your memory and memorize it better. Why experiments fall into quantitative research techniques? Well, that's because the aspects that we are investigating and the way we are measuring them, they have more quantitative nature. Also, experiment falls into quantitative research technique family because we have hypotheses, we want to quantify them, we want to test them, and we also looking at statistical ways or using statistics to analyze the data. So this is why it fits more in the family of quantitative research techniques. You may have already guessed that experiment is basically a method of investigation, and it originated in sciences, and this is basically a reflection of how sciences have developed after the Enlightenment era in Europe, where scholars were trying to understand the physical world around them. They started doing a lot of experiments in physics or chemistry, alchemy, as they were trying to use some metals and convert them into gold. These were fun times. And then slowly, as science has developed and we've accumulated more knowledge about societies or humans, this method of inquiry actually was borrowed into social sciences. At the moment, experiments are very popular in marketing. They are very popular in psychology and social psychology and also sociology. So, this is why it's important for you to understand how you can use it to measure the social phenomenon or an individual phenomenon that you are investigating. Other method of an investigation experiment involves you developing hypotheses and then scientifically testing them by manipulating your independent variable. And while you're doing this, you also try to measure changes in your dependent variable while controlling for any extraneous variable so that you can, with certainty, establish that the variations in the dependent variable were truly observed due to changes or variations in your independent variable. Now, if you're not familiar with independent and dependent variable terms, please watch a separate video on this channel because I made one for you. As you can see here, I've got in brackets the cause, intervention, or X, which are the alternative names or synonyms for independent variable. You may notice that in some disciplines, intervention may be the term that is used. That could be in sciences or in psychology. The cause or X could be another way to call an independent variable. So always reflect back on the terminology and jargon which is used in your discipline and then use it consistently. Experiments are very popular ways to investigate social phenomena or phenomena in individuals, and it is frequently used in psychology, sociology, marketing, of course, management discipline, human resources. Also, economists run experiments. So, this is a very worthy tool to get your head around and understand what is going on with this method. Now, let's look at very important parts of this definition and break it down a bit. Independent variable is usually something that stands alone, which means that it is not influenced by any other factors. This is very important for an experiment because this is the core of your research. You are trying to develop your hypothesis around your dependent variable because you are saying if this is present, this intervention or this particular variation in a factor, then this is the change that is likely to occur in my dependent variable, whatever that I am measuring. And as you may have already guessed, dependent variable is then something that we are measuring, that we are observing in a quantitative manner that is changing due to those variations in your independent variable. So dependent variable usually is something that changes as a result of those different interventions that you execute. Let's have a look at an example. Let's say we are running an experiment and we are trying to understand whether mood changes, which represents our independent variable, causes different ice cream color choice. So in this case, our mood manipulation, and I'm taking very basic moods. There are a lot more type of moods out there, but I'm taking happy versus sad as my two levels of variation in independent variable. And I am looking at the ice cream color choice as my dependent variable. And my hypothesis here would be when people are happy, they will go for brighter colors of ice cream. And when people are feeling blue or they feeling sad, then they will go for darker or paler colors of ice cream. Now, this may not necessarily be correct. This is example that I made up for this video. If you find an academic paper which actually looked into what I'm saying, please put it down below in comments. I would love to read it. So as you can see in this example, my level of variations, my intervention is actually the mood. And as a researcher, you can manipulate mood. You can make people feel happy or sad. Well, the ethics behind it is topic for another video. But in an experiment, if you want to manipulate the mood, you can expose people to different stimuli so that you induce happier versus sadder moods. You can use music to induce the mood variations. So as you can see, my independent variable, which is mood, has several levels, namely two levels. And this is what is sometimes referred to as factorial design. So this is my first factor, and it has two levels. And they are manipulated because some participants will be exposed to a happy stimuli so that we make them feel happier. And another group of participants will be exposed to a sad stimuli so that they feel sadder. While we are running this experiment, what we also want is we want to control for any extraneous variables. This is why now I have this aspect of the definition highlighted. This is super important because as a researcher, whether you're doing research for industry as a consultant or you do it in academia, you always want to be sure that it is your independent variable, your cause, your manipulation that you are executed is responsible for those changes in the dependent variable. And this is why you want to control for any other factor that may influence the choice of ice cream in this case. And one of the ways for us in this hypothetical example that I'm using to control for any extraneous variables is to invite people to come into our venue, because in this case, we can actually ensure that we control for pollen. So some flowers, some smells can stimulate or excite people. Inviting people into a controlled lab also helps us ensure that everyone is exposed to exactly same lighting. So some people tend to feel happier when it's sunny, when it's bright outside, and some people tend to be sad when it's gloomy, dark, there is an overcast. So you want to avoid the impact of those variables. You want to control for them so that your conditions, when they are viewed, the happy stimuli or the sad stimuli, they have nothing to do with the weather or temperature outside that lab. This is what is referred to controlling. You try to control, and in other words, isolate the impact of other factors which may impact on the choice of the ice cream. And in this case, it could be the weather, it could be the smell. Some smells can excite people, or it could be music, because if people listen to sad music, they may tend to feel sad, versus when they listen to a happier music, they may also feel a bit more happy. So as a researcher, before you run your experiment, you need to understand what are the other factors which may impact on the dependent variables that I am studying. And once you've identified, so you have a very solid foundation of past research, you understand all possible factors that may impact on dependent variable outcomes, then you are ready to conduct an experiment. Because in the experiment, when you run it in a controlled environment, which means you isolate the factors, other factors that may impact it, Only then you can establish causality, saying controlling for all other factors. This is the effect that we have observed on ice cream color choice, conditioned by the mood that they were exposed to. When we talk about controlling for any other extraneous variables, another key important aspect when it comes to research is how participants were allocated to your experimental conditions. That may have important implications on the outcomes that you may be observing in your dependent variable. And as a researcher, you want to establish that it is your intervention, your cause, your independent variable, which is causing those variations in the dependent variable in the ice cream choice. Let's have a look at an example. But here, what is important is you need to understand that before people come and participate in your experiment, they may be already feeling sad or happier. That's why I have emojis with different emotions here or moods, right? This will have important implications on what you will observe in your experiment, okay? Because if you are non-randomly allocating participants to your conditions, you may end up with a funny scenario where sad people would go into the sad condition. So naturally, your choices in the color in the ice cream may be skewed by how they felt before you actually expose them to sad stimuli. So they may have become even sadder, right? And if you have people, and for some reason the happy, chirpy ones got allocated to your happy inducement mood condition, then of course you would have results which will not reflect the reality. So participants' allocation to experimental condition is very important. Ideally, they need to be in a neutral mood so that you can easily establish that it's really the effect of your intervention that is causing this choice. So now you may think, wow, experiments are hard. Yes, they are. But when they are performed correctly, when they are planned and carried out properly, then they can provide unique and amazing insights to us as researchers and for policymakers, for companies, for brands. So experiments are a useful tool. They just need to be really carefully thought through. Before you run an experiment, you need to think, what are all those possible conditions that may actually impact or screw up the effects that I want to measure? So also here, I'd like to say that experiments is the only method that can establish causality. This is why when you review papers for journals and you encounter a study which was based on a survey and it has causal language, please keep in mind only experiment can establish causality because you control for the impact of any other extraneous variables. You randomly allocate participants in ideal scenario. Okay, I have a separate video on participant allocation. And if you are doing a survey, you are basically looking at a relationship between your variables. This is why here I have X as our independent variable and an arrow leading to the Y, to the dependent variable, in a more causal way. When we are dealing with a survey and we measure how people feel on a daily basis in terms of their mood, and every day we ask them how many scoops of ice cream they purchased, what was their color, then we actually look at correlational data, at relationship, which means we cannot establish causality because we don't know which music they listen to. We don't know what else was happening there. When only in the experiment you can try to isolate all those external conditions, and because you isolate them, you can say, okay, mood does really predict your ice cream color choice. Here, if you are doing a survey, which means it's a cross-sectional data you are collecting, it is only correlational nature of the relationship between mood and ice cream that you may be looking at. So keep that in mind. This is important. And I have a separate video where I talk about the difference between a survey and an experiment. Now, this is everything about an experiment. I hope now it's clear to you what it involves and why it is so different from qualitative research and why it is so different from surveys.